You're listening to How to Stan, the podcast about both specific fandoms and fandom culture and Hollywood as a whole. To learn more about this show as well as the other podcast I do, 17 Karat K-Pop, and to find a link to a playlist of every How to Stan episode, which will all be in your feed if you're subscribed to 17 Karat K-Pop, visit 17, that's 17, carat, C-A-R-A-T, kpop.weebly.com. All of my content is free right now, but please, to make that stay the case, consider supporting this show, and supporting a young independent creator's podcasting dreams would really mean a lot to me. You can donate as little as $1 a month or up to $10 depending on what you want to contribute and how much benefit you see in my work. So if you like what you hear and want to show your support for it, visit anchor.fm/hope-jacobson with an O, not an E, /support. Or you can go to 17karatkpop.weebly.com and on the front page, click on the Support the Show button. Thank you in advance and enjoy the show. Welcome back to How to Stan. Today, my special guest is Bonnie J. Wallace. She's an author. She does consultations with young actors and their parents. She's also the host of the podcast Hometown to Hollywood. And she's also known to be the mom of some famous people. She is the mom of Dove Cameron, the actress and singer, as well as the vocal coach, Claire Hosterman. Lots of interesting experiences that I'm excited to hear more about. I have a really broad question to start with. Just, would you mind sharing a bit of your story for people who don't know it, about just where this all came from, your podcast and your consultations and what led to your family's move to California? There's quite a story there.
There is. We're not from Los Angeles. Like most people in the industry, we came from somewhere else. And we're from an island near Seattle called Bainbridge Island. I grew up there, and my kids grew up there. And we were all involved in community theater there. There's a fantastic community theater. And so Dove was doing probably 5 years of community theater. And by the time she hit 13, she kind of maxed out what she could do in the Seattle area. You know, she had a little agent. There's not much you can do. There's no real film and TV up there, and an occasional commercial. And she even wasn't getting roles at the community theater because they just weren't casting stuff. There wasn't anything for her age group that year. And so she started beating the drum to move to LA. She's like, Mom, I need to move to LA. This is where it's all happening. This is what I want to do. I want my shot. And at the same time, her mentors, her directors and her acting coaches and her vocal coach were all taking me aside quietly and saying, you know, this kid's really got the gift. And if you want to give her a shot at fulfilling that, you need to go to LA. After literally a year of Dove lobbying me daily, as she puts it, when she tells the story, she's like, I did everything but make a PowerPoint presentation about why we had to go to LA. I finally thought, you know what? I know that the odds are crazy. I never wanted to look back and just wonder, what if we just gone for it? What might have happened? You know, I didn't want to live with that. And I didn't want her to live with that either. So I finally thought, all right, let's give it a shot. So we did the dumb thing that I tell everybody not to do. We didn't know what we were doing. We threw everything into a truck and we moved to LA. And just landed here going, okay, I'm a smart cookie. I can figure this out. But there's so much more to succeeding in the industry than meets the eye. It really took me a while to get my sea legs with it. And by the time we were clearly getting somewhere and she had her own show and, you know, there was some serious traction going on, I realized that I was in a position to give back. And I realized that I was in a unique position to help other families in particular navigate that whole process with more ease than we'd had. You know, write my first book, The Hollywood Parents Guide, and I started a blog, and podcast followed pretty quickly after that. Then I started consulting.
It sounds like, so you ended up moving to California quite a while before Dove was cast in Liv and Maddie.
Well, yeah, the timeline's kind of interesting there. So we moved when she was 14 and a half. And I say the half because I think it's important to know that she was just as close to 15 as she was to 14 when we landed here. Exactly a year to the week later, so a full calendar year went by before she booked her first role. And that was a really, really long year for us, you know, wondering if we had made a mistake, wondering if we were crazy, you know, lots of auditions before she finally got her first role, which was a 2-episode arc on Shameless, of all things. And You know, it's like, okay, that's, and we actually laughed about it at the time. We're like, well, there goes Disney. Not that she was
Yeah.
aiming for Disney,
Yeah.
because she wasn't. And there's another story there. But a full year after we land here before she gets her first thing, and 8 more months after that before she got her second thing, which was the pilot called Bits and Pieces, which became Liv and Maddie after it was retooled. So she's 16 now and she's shooting the pilot for what becomes Liv and Maddie. She was 17 when it started filming. And honestly, in terms of the average time that it takes somebody to kind of get some traction and start booking stuff, that was fast.
It was originally not even a whole thing with twins, was it? And then it turned into like a show about twins.
That's exactly right. So it was originally a show called Bits and Pieces. It was sort of like Brady Bunch blended family meets sketch comedy. So it was like these little vignettes, and it was really cute, and I liked it, but it was maybe a little too sophisticated, and it didn't have like a single story arc to it, and so it didn't test well. But Dove tested super well, and there was great chemistry with the cast and all the executive producers and everybody. And so Gary Marsh, who's the head of the Disney Channel, said, look, I've always wanted to do this crazy, you know, we might think of it as a Parent Trap, but really the original show was the Patty Duke show, right? Where one girl is playing identical girls. And I've never found anybody that I thought could pull it off, but I think Dove is that person. So they basically just completely rewrote the show, took the same cast more or less, and went forward with it. So nobody auditioned for twins, not even Dove.
That's really an interesting role to have as one of your first roles.
Yeah, it was. And by the time she was shooting Liv and Maddie, finally, she'd not only done a couple of episodes on Shameless, but she'd done the entire snowboarding movie Cloud Nine, a big episode on The Mentalist. She had done something on Malibu Country. She'd kind of gotten her sea legs by the time they were doing Liv and Maddie. But that was like a boot camp, you know?
What was that year like before Liv and Maddie? How do you network and stuff when you first are in California and you're not even from there? Like, how do you even navigate that?
You know, I'm from a small place, and I literally I know people I've known all my life up there. My family's all up there. So coming to some place where, you know, I basically knew nobody. You know, there's a kind of a culture shock just to landing in LA. I have to say there's a kind of a culture shock with the jump from theater to film and TV. This is something that I've seen over and over again in the last 10 years since I've been consulting. A lot of young people especially fall in love with theater because it's got this extraordinary community available, especially if you're like working with the same people season after season, like you've got a local theater that you do shows in, or, you know, community theater or something. It's just the most magical, wonderful thing. Or say high school theater.
With theater, it feels like there's this welcoming community, and then I guess it's probably, I would assume, a different world with TV and movie sets.
It can be. Dove has had some incredible, amazing, beautiful, warm, fuzzy, wonderful experiences on film and TV. It's just that it's less of a given. If you're a series regular, you know, and you show up and you shoot week after week for months and maybe years, then you're going to develop relationships like you do in theater, right? But if you're cast as a guest star, you're walking into somebody else's kind of family vibe. Everybody else knows each other. You don't. You're like the new kid, but you're only there for a day or a couple of days, and then you're gone. So you can't create real relationship in that short period of time. But if you're like on a movie set there for weeks or months, you can. So it just kind of depends. And it also depends very much on the people involved, right? It can be a bit of a wake-up call for young actors.
When Dove was cast on Liv and Maddie, I know you mentioned she had done Shameless before, and then it was kind of like, oh, there goes Disney. What did they think about? Did they care that she'd been on Shameless before? Like, what was it like, just reputation-wise? I don't know, anything like past projects she'd been on, or was that no concern to them? Or
well, that's a great question, and we figured that it would matter. It did and it didn't. So some years after Liv and Maddie was happening, we had a chance to ask Gary Marsh specifically that, because we were just curious. And he said, you know what? I never thought it was a problem because they don't have the same audience. You know, none of the kids watching the Disney Channel probably should be watching Shameless, because Shameless is like rated R+, right? The audiences are completely different. But what was funny, by the time she did book Liv and Maddie, you know, a year and 8 months, what became Liv and Maddie, right? A year and 8 months after we'd landed here, she'd actually asked her agent, Pam Fisher, at what was Abrams and is now A3, to stop sending her out for Disney auditions because she's like, they don't get me. They don't see me. They don't think I'm funny. I'm here to do like serious dramatic film. So she actually stopped going out for Disney stuff for a while. Then the script came out, a breakdown, which is a description of sort of the script and the project. And it was so cool and interesting, the bits and pieces thing, that we thought, all right, let's say yes to this. Let's give it a go. And then, of course, she booked it.
Then after that, when she was cast in Descendants, was that something she seemed to be excited for, or by that point already she was kind of like done with Disney stuff? Or
it's so funny. She'd been working all day, like she'd put in a good 8-hour day, and it was kind of the end of the day, and we got this call from the channel saying, hey, we've got this script we'd like you to look at. Would you just come by on your way home? Just come up to the top floor and take a look at the script. And I said, she's really tired. Can't you just send it to us? They're like, no, actually, this is a really secret script and we can't let it out of the building. You have to come up here and sit in a room and read it. It's not going to get emailed to you. We're going to have it printed out waiting for you in this little room. So we said, okay, that's really different. And so we went up to the top floor, sat in this little room where it was just the two of us and a table and 2 chairs and 2 scripts. And we read it. We sat and we read through the entire script of Descendants 1, and they didn't tell her why they wanted her to read it. They just wanted her to read it and tell them what she thought. And by the time she finished reading it, she's like, I have to play this role. This role is mine. I am meant to play this role. I want this role so much. And she did have to audition for it. And quite a few people auditioned for Mal. Quite a few people auditioned for all the roles. I mean, they shook the bushes to find just the right actors for the right roles. And actually, Kenny Ortega is my most recent podcast guest. The podcast just dropped like a day or 2 ago. And he tells the story from his point of view of when she auditioned for Descendants. And it's a good story.
So when she first read the script, was it a given that she would be Mal?
I felt that they knew that she was, this would be a good fit for her, but they weren't really fully casting it, right? Like the final choice, I think, was up to Kenny Ortega pretty much. And he'd never met her. He didn't even know who she was. He literally had no idea who she was until she walked in the room and did audition for the role. Disney kind of was like, we think we know who's probably the right person for this, but we are going to audition a bunch of people. We'll see what Kenny thinks. Choosing who goes into what roles is a really complex process, and a lot of it is about chemistry, and a lot of it is about like the big picture and the balance of all the different actors and their energies. So it was not a done deal. Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about one of the many things that's interesting about Disney is they really track talent. Like when they find a young actor that they're excited about and that they feel has like really great promise and potential, they will track them, and they will sometimes spend years trying to find the right project for them. I think it was Selena Gomez who literally, like, Disney had her on the lead of 2 different pilots that didn't go forward until finally they found Wizards of Waverly Place, and that's when it all clicked, and they're like, okay, this is the vehicle for her. They tracked Luke Benward for years and years and years. I think he was the lead also in 2 different pilots that, never saw the light of day. And every time you're a series regular in a pilot, you know your life could totally change if it happens, but most pilots don't go forward. So, Luke also, like, cast, nothing happens. Another year, cast in some huge lead, cool show, nothing happened. And Dove auditioned for both of those shows, didn't get cast, and then finally cast Luke in Cloud 9 and something else. They find these actors that they get excited about and believe in, and they really will work hard to find the right fit for them. A lot of the times too, like if they get excited about somebody but they want to sort of like test them out, and honestly, it's not just the actor, it's the parents too. They will cast them as a guest star and see how they do, and see if the parents are easy or difficult, crazy or, like grounded. A big part of the equation. You can have an incredibly amazing, talented kid, but if the parents are just really a nightmare, like, life's too short. They won't cast that kid.
Then when Liv and Maddie came to a close, I'm just curious, like, about that transition period. Was Disney still helping her get roles, or was it kind of like she was kind of moved on and was getting different roles totally outside of...
Say that Disney helps actors get roles exactly. It's more like, okay, If they're looking for somebody for a new series, they're going to track them and try and find a good fit for them, right? So she'd already done, 80 episodes, 4 seasons of Liv and Maddie. And at that point, she was 20. Now, if she'd been younger, as say Cameron Boyce was, they might have tried to get her to do another series. But when you end a series and you're 20, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do yet another Disney series. You've kind of been there, done that, right? She filmed Descendants 1 when she was 18, Descendants 2 when she was 20. So that was right, as a matter of fact. She was filming Descendants, I think, when Liv and Maddie even had its wrap party. It was like they were right on top of each other. Nah, I may have gotten the timing of that wrong. So she was 20 when she was filming Descendants 2. Nobody knew for sure if there was going to be a Descendants 3. Everybody hoped there would be. But so she was 22 when she filmed Descendants 3, 23 when it came out. At that point, she'd been with Disney since she was 16. And it's like, okay, it's time to just stretch your wings a little bit.
Before Descendants 3 came out, but like after Liv and Maddie was done and she was kind of moving into other roles, was it viewed as she was ready to, like, they were fine with her just kind of auditioning for whatever? I'm just curious, image-wise, how she was able to just kind of move on from Disney while still Descendants 3 was still coming out, so she was also still viewed as like a Disney girl. I guess I'm wondering if there was any like limitation on what she could do acting-wise.
I think there's a lot of assumptions about, what Disney asks of its actors in terms of the image that they put out in public and what other projects they might get involved with. While you're on a series, there is language in the contract that says that you can't do stuff that runs counter to the sort of family thing of Disney. And that makes all kinds of sense in the world. But once you've stopped filming a series, you're not under contract anymore. So Dove ceased being under contract to Disney really after Liv and Maddie ended. If Descendants 3 had been like a 3-movie deal from the get-go, you might have been able to say, well, look, you're under contract until Descendants 3 comes out or until it films or whatever. They were each standalone projects. She was technically free to do whatever she wanted to do from the age of 20 on forward after she was done shooting Liv and Maddie. The thing about Dove is, she's incredibly intelligent and she has no desire to, tip the apple cart, if you will, or to upset anybody. She just wants to, she's deeply creative and she wants to experience all kinds of different roles because that's juicy for an actor. It's not like she felt a big pressure to only do certain kinds of projects. The truth of being an actor is you get sent out on totally random auditions. Monday, you could be sent out for a horror film. Tuesday, you could be sent out for a Hallmark Christmas movie. Wednesday, you might go out for a soap opera. It's so random. It's just like roulette, and you just get what you get in terms of the audition opportunities, and then you land what you land, right? So in her case, because of the sort of combination of acting and singing that she'd done with Liv and Maddie and with Descendants, opened some fun doors for her. So she did Mamma Mia at the Hollywood Bowl. She did Hairspray Live, which was super, super fun. Cher in Clueless the Musical off-Broadway. She ended up doing Light in the Piazza in London on the West End and here at the Opera House. And like some really juicy musical theater type stuff. I don't know that she's really done anything that you'd say is like really, really, really counter to Disney. What she's doing now with Powerpuff looks really cool.
Yeah.
She's having an absolute blast. Looks like they all are. That's going to be a little edgier. That's aimed at sort of a CW audience, if you will.
I feel like there's this constant narrative whenever a Disney star like moves on from the channel that they're gonna like be totally rebellious and stuff. And I just feel like there's just a lot more nuance than dismissing it as that, because I feel like, well, after you've spent all those years with Disney, you probably do want to do something that's different, and that, it's just, I guess I'm not a fan of the framing of it when Disney stars move on.
If I had a dime for every time somebody said, well, I hope she doesn't pull a Miley, it's like, come on, people. That's not who she is. It's never been who she is. And yes, I think when you're a good person and you know that your primary fan base is younger people, most actors are just actors. They don't have the additional emotional freight of knowing that they are in a role model position. You know what I mean? But the Disney Channel stars, they all know that. They know it really well. And most of them are like really good, smart, young people. And they want to do right by that. They're really impressionable, right? So she always has been so mindful of that. At the same time, she's a complex, intelligent human being, and she deserves, as we all do, to feel authentic and to feel seen. You're right. It is much more nuanced than I think the public generally gives it credit for.
It's not like, again, that weird like black and white narrative of they're in Disney and they feel like they're repressed from being their true selves, and then they leave and they feel free. It really does seem like, no, I mean, they still feel free to an extent at Disney.
I can't speak for everybody who's ever been on the channel, obviously. I know a lot of the talent and their families, but speaking just for us, and I think I can speak pretty well for Dove here, it was an amazing, beautiful 4 years on Liv and Maddie. I mean, it really was like a family. And the thing that the fans don't get a chance to see or know, all the people behind the scenes. I mean, what you see is you see the cast. You see the series regulars, and you see the guest star cast that comes and goes. I mean, some of them, my God, Jessica Marie Garcia was literally on 40 out of the 80 episodes of Liv and Maddie. She was practically a series regular. She was on half the episodes. And so you develop these amazing friendships and relationships, but there's so much more than just the cast. It's the executive producers. It's the hair and makeup people. It's some of the tech people. It's maybe the wardrobe people. It's like an entire ecosystem of 100+ people.
Is there some crossover with that in other Disney projects? Like some of the crew members from Liv and Maddie maybe worked on Descendants?
So Descendants was shot in Vancouver, and crews tend to be local to their city, right? So the crew for all the Descendants stuff was all Canadian, because there's plenty of great crew up there, and the crew for Liv and Maddie, all LA based. We have had numerous experiences of her shooting something completely unrelated project, and like, oh my gosh, it's the camera guy from Liv and Maddie, like one of the camera guys cool. who shot Hollywood Bowl Mamma Mia thing was from Liv and Maddie. Second AD that we ran into, several different projects, several years apart. Crew can't sit around and only work 2 days a week. That's not enough money for them. So they'll shoot 2 shows at the same time. That maybe they work on Liv and Maddie, and maybe they work on something else.
I'd like to hear more about your mentoring. What were your early days like in consulting young actors, and kind of how have your consultations changed? And because I'm curious, because it's an interesting parallel tracks here with Dove growing up in the spotlight and you mentoring parents of other young actors.
When I first decided, all right, you know what, I'm in a good position to help other people who are like us, other families like ours. All I really had to go on was everything we'd learned, which at that point was quite a lot. But I also had, since I landed here, kind of rolled up my sleeves and got serious about learning everything I could about the industry and how it works to help Dove. Over probably the first year or so of learning how to consult, if you will, because you learn by doing, really, ultimately. The people that I consulted with sort of showed me what they needed, what they were missing, what their concerns were, what they were worried about, what wasn't working, what they didn't know that they didn't know. After about the first year, I ultimately put together, it's like a sieve that I run everybody through. It's literally a full list of questions and topics that I kind of pull everybody through. And, by the time we go through all of it in an hour or an hour and a half, depending on what they've booked, we have just so thoroughly covered just about everything. And I came up with that list of things that I go through, like a checklist almost, over time. And it's been modified a little bit here and there. And yeah, it does differ a little bit whether I'm talking to a parent of a 10-year-old who just landed here and is just starting out, or maybe they're not even here. Maybe they're in Florida or somewhere, somewhere completely different. They're going to have different questions than a 22-year-old who just, landed here after getting their 4-year degree in acting somewhere, and they're not worried about school. Some of the questions are a bit different around the edges, but probably 80% of it's the same. One of the things that I find is that because people have that sort of thing in their head, like, okay, I need a headshot on your resume, I need an agent. Well, you can go spend a couple $100 and get a headshot. By the time you land in LA, you better have something on your resume, even if it's just a bunch of community theater and some training. It's a little bit of a catch-22, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, you can get roles without an agent. You can sign up for Actors Access or Backstage or casting networks, and you can audition for non-union stuff and student films, and you can kind of cut your teeth on how to audition and, hopefully maybe even get some actual experience, make a little bit of money. You can do that without an agent. But if you rush getting an agent, you risk getting a not very good agent. Because really good agents are only going to sign somebody when they feel like they can send them out now to compete. And so if you're just starting out, the only agent you're going to probably attract is somebody who probably can't get you great auditions. Yes, if they're casting a big movie, they will shake the bushes. They will look everywhere. They will look all across the country. Sometimes they'll look all across the world. If they're casting something that's just like a guest star or a co-star, they're only going to look in the area where the show is being shot. Like, so say Liv and Maddie. They looked all over the country to find the leads in it. But once the leads are set and you're shooting one of the 80 episodes, for example, they're only looking at the co-stars and guest stars locally, because it makes no sense to bring people in from the outside. There's plenty of good actors here. Why I'm belaboring this is those are the bread and butter roles that you can build a resume with and build a career with. And you only have a shot at those if you're here, and you only have a shot at those if you have a good agent. Casting doesn't have time to look at thousands of audition tapes for a guest star role. They don't. They're going to look at dozens, maybe hundreds, but probably dozens. Well, so who's get looked at? The auditions from the better agents, because the casting knows that they're going to have better actors and they're likely to find what they want. So by the time they go through all the submissions from the top agents, they've almost always found what they're looking for and they stop looking. So if you're represented by like a C-list agent, you're not going to get anywhere. And so from that standpoint, in my eyes, it's better to take a little more time. Don't even try to get an agent until you've gotten some really good coaching. You've gotten some really good, training. Training is really underrated in my eyes. And had some kind of experience. And then you might get a decent agent. And then you have a chance at getting some auditions that are juicy.
Is that a common issue with the people you talk to? Like they want to jump right to the big starring roles as opposed to remembering you should probably start small.
It happens. Obviously, there's always an exception to the rule. But if you look on IMDb, at your favorite actors, look at their page, and it's all listed chronologically pretty much. So you can go all the way down to the bottom and see where they started. Most of them were like, Pizza Girl number 4 on some thing that you never heard of. And then they were Pizza Girl number 2 in the next one. And every time you book something like that, it's like, okay, that's another thing for the resume, another thing for the reel. Now another casting director. So much of it is just, you talked about networking earlier. There is a thing where you just kind of have to get out in front of as many casting directors as you can, so that they know who you are, so that they think of you next time they're looking for somebody. And that just takes time.
Do your clients tend to be people who are in the earlier stages of their career and trying to figure that all out, or?
At the beginning, I mostly got people who were just entering into the industry and they knew they needed help, so I'm an easy and obvious person to look for when you need help. Then I started to get more and more people who actually had some fair traction, like, had been doing it for a handful of years and, had a pretty good resume. And then they would reach out to me because they were stuck somewhere. Like, you know what, I got to get a new manager and I'm not quite sure how to navigate that. Now I'm getting more and more young adults, which is interesting. And I don't know if that's because of the podcast, they're finding me that way, or they've kind of just grown up along with Dove, who's 25 now, and, they're actors too. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Do you often have, when you're dealing with the younger actors, parents go into the consultations? Do parents tend to take a backseat, or do you...
I like it if the kid is, say, at least 10, if they want to be on the call. I mean, we used to meet in coffee shops, but now this last year it's all been Zoom, of course. Because I think, kid, it's your life, it's your career. You should be, you're going to hear some things from my mouth that are going to land. Maybe your parents have been saying the same thing for a year, but you don't listen to them because they're your parents, right? You might listen if it comes from me. It's their career. They should be involved in it. That being said, sometimes the parents want to have a conversation that's not really fully appropriate for the kid to be part of for one reason or another. And in that case, that's fine. And I have had both parents and kids be on calls where the kid is totally driving the show. And I think that's really cool when that happens.
Does the opposite happen too, though? Like when the parents are a bit, I guess stage parent probably isn't the best wording of it, but...
It's so interesting. There's that sort of like there's the stereotype, if you will, of the Disney kid.
Mm-hmm.
There's a total stereotype of a stage parent, and it's not a pretty one. Nobody who actually is a stage parent wants to identify as one. My experience, literally like 99% of the time, without exaggeration, is that the parents of young actors that either I have met on set and worked with, like as peers while our kids were on film together, or that have come to me for consultations, 99% of them are smart, normal, grounded, good people who are just trying to do their best to do right by their kid. End of story. And it's usually, no kidding, the kid who's leading the show, and the parents are like, I don't know where they got it from, but this is their big passion and I just want to help them out if I can, and it's not the parents pushing, mm-hmm. It's the kids pulling. So I have seen very little. I don't think the stereotypes are borne out by reality.
I think it's just, it can be a stressful, cutthroat industry, and that's probably why some parents are very hesitant to even let their kid...
Mm-hmm. What I do see is that at the very sort of lower levels of the industry, that's where it can get kind of dicey. The scam artists, and there's plenty of them out there, will prey on the people who don't know what they're doing. Hollywood Parents Guide, which was my first book, was literally, the way I designed it was I just asked myself, what is every single thing I wish I had known when I started this thing? I wrote the book that had every single thing in it that I wish we'd known. That was a pretty good guiding principle. And I wrote it to be as evergreen as possible. And gosh, it came out in 2015. And it still really, really holds up. If I were to rewrite it, if I were to do a second edition, which I might, I just don't have the bandwidth right now, but I think in another year or two I will, I would add a social media chapter. And I would write a chapter on safety. Best practices for staying safe in the industry, from auditioning to the way you tag your photos and what you put on social media. There's some overlap in those two subjects, obviously.
It sounds like the podcast then kind of came up alongside the books kind of organically.
It's funny, before I came down here, literally weeks before Dove and I moved down here, I had just completed a master's degree in sustainable business. And the ink was drying as we backed up. And one of the in those 2 years was something called Creating Social Change Through the Social Web. And I was in my mid-40s, and I'm like, what is this, social media thing? Podcasts were just starting really to be a thing 10, 11 years ago when we landed here. And I always thought that'd be really fun. And then after a couple of years went by doing this, I thought, a podcast would be a great way to reach people. And the other thing that's so neat about the podcast, the whole aim of the podcast is to educate and to inspire. That's honestly the aim of every single thing I do, is education and inspiration. But one of the sweet things about the podcast is, for me, I learn something every time. And it's made me a seriously better expert, to have talked to these amazing, talented actors and directors and agents and managers and casting directors and producers. And their wisdom is serious.
So they've probably been kind of indirectly giving you the ideas for the next book or the next, consulting you do. So for people who haven't heard your show before, what are some key episodes they should check out first? What are some key insights that they'll get from listening to the show?
The people that I have on the podcast are people who are at the top of their game in the industry. So they're really successful actors or directors, or as I said, agents, managers, producers. So what they have to share is significant. We have a 1 hour authentic, intimate conversation. Until this last year, it was literally generally on my couch. We speak really frankly about their experiences, and the questions that I designed for the podcast are questions that I think the listeners would want to know. It's also meant to be as evergreen as possible, so that if somebody listened to an interview from, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, like say from the first season or so, it shouldn't be something very different than if they listened to it and it was filmed or it was recorded last week. Because unlike a lot of these things, I don't ask them about their current projects very much. I ask more about their journey. Some of my favorite ones, like there's 132, there's so many. There's only probably a few that I would say, One of my very favorites is the one I did with Dove. So authentic. She's so just completely tells it like it is, so generously. I'm her mom and she's my kid. So we had a really fun interview. Probably read and listened to just about all the major interviews she's ever done. So I'm familiar with them. And I have to say, I think it's one of the best ones she's ever done. So Doves is definitely a don't miss. The one I dropped this week with Kenny Ortega, far and away one of the best ever in the podcast. So good and so inspiring. Kristen Chenoweth, also really banner. Jordan Fisher, Cameron Boyce. Cameron was so generous. His was so long, we had to cut it into 2 pieces originally. Boo Boo Stewart, Jessica Marie Garcia, who's been on twice. There's so many good ones. Start with the ones that you know will be fun because you admire the actor, or you know the director or whatever. Do all of those. And then after that, like nose around. And like there's some really surprisingly great ones that from people that you won't know, but they're amazing.
Yeah, I would say the appeal, you get into it probably because of like Dove Cameron or someone. At least that's how I started listening to it. And then it feels like, oh, wow, this is really cool and interesting to hear people who are so passionate talk about how they got to where they are.
Podcast was free for most of its life, but about a year ago, I realized I needed it to at least pay for itself. So now you can listen to the first minutes or so for free. I'm asking people to pay $5 a month. And what that gives you is that gives you access to the entire library of 132 episodes for $5 a month. I figure that's a pretty good deal. You can find my website, which is hometowntohollywood.com, because Hometown to Hollywood is the name of the podcast as well as my business. And there's a whole bunch of resources there as well.
Before I let you go, there's one more topic I would love to hear your thoughts on, and that is what my show is all about, which is fans and fandom culture. And I'm curious, as a mom, how you've seen a really open-ended question, but I'm just curious what your take is on experiences seeing fans. What is it about Dove Cameron that people seem to gravitate towards? How is that fan base kind of formed, like the Liv and Maddie fan base or the Descendants fan base or both?
It does seem like there's a sort of a special relationship there. And I think that might be because she's just so authentic. She's so raw. She's so honest. She doesn't gloss over the hard stuff. And I think because of that, people feel a sense of connection with her. And social media has definitely really fostered that. It is possible now for fans to have a real sense of communication with people. You really kind of only got what they put out there or their publicity people put out there. And so, we really only kind of had a sense of who these people might be as people through a very filtered lens. Social media is so, or can be so unfiltered. When she first started to get recognized out in public, she actually did have panic attacks because it is not something that, like, our nervous systems aren't set up to be just like, walking down the street with your family and suddenly somebody jumps out at you and is freaking out. She's such a gracious human. I mean, she just is. She's really, really gracious, and she's got a massive heart. And, if she can connect with somebody who's reached out to her, she will. She can't always, and by and large, because her fans are mostly really cool, good people, they get that if that happens. But no, she connects however she can when she can.
It does seem like fans do kind of, I mean, because there are sometimes where it feels like social media and stuff has the downside of making it feel like the star is available to you. Sometimes they don't want it to be always available to you.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting that that is a really nuanced thing, and
Mhm.
I honestly think that it's gotten better in the last few years, and it's not just because she's gotten better at like managing it and dealing with it,
Mhm.
well, but I think the fans. There was a period of time early on with the whole Liv and Maddie time where I think she was more objectified. They were reacting to an idea of her because they really had a very sort of, they were reacting to her like she was Liv or Maddie, right?
Like a Disney girl
Like
stereotype type of thing.
exactly like a Disney girl stereotype. And it was like there wasn't a lot of interaction with like who Dove as a human is. And
Hmm.
she's a human, and she's a very sensitive human. And so that was really hard for her. But I think over the last few years, especially as she's gotten a little more out there on social media with just her mental health and her emotional health and like the reality of being a human in the world and sharing that, I feel like the last few years as she's been more honest, more authentic, more transparent with her social media, that the tenor of the relationship between her and the fans has changed a bit, because I think that they are responding to that like, oh, right, we are all humans here. And I feel like
Hmm.
she's less objectified, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, yeah, I think because when stars are super vulnerable and just open, I feel like that does make any time a fan talks to them better for both of them in a way because they're just speaking as humans to each other as opposed to and to celebrity. It's more just like human to human at that point.
I agree completely. Yeah, there's something that's inherently objectifying at a certain level of with that sort of like conversation, but it doesn't have to be, I
Hmm.
think. And I think that she's appreciating kind of being in a different place around that now.
Right. Moments of connection as opposed to just moments of signing an autograph or something.
Yeah, because like that's just not that meaningful, but real connection's always meaningful.
Before I go, is there anything else you would like to share with my listeners about the industry? Maybe a big takeaway, a big misconception they might have about Hollywood, something they should know if they want to get into the industry?
One of my big takeaways from the last 10 years coming here is I had a certain idea of what LA was like and Hollywood was like. What I've really experienced is that it is full of incredibly intelligent, creative, hard working people. Everybody that is somebody you know of because they've reached a level of success that you might know who they are, like you know their name or something, you know their work, has only gotten there because they've worked so hard for it. It makes for really cool people because smart, creative, hardworking people are great people. And so I've just been blown away by how much I really just like and enjoy and appreciate the people that I've had, the privilege of getting to know here in the industry. If people want to come here and want to like make a go of it, I would say do all the homework you can before you come here. Max out where you are before you leave. Go as far as you can where you are. Listen to the podcast, read the books, school yourself so that when you do land here, you can land running.
That's a great advice to end with. So, well, this was a really good conversation. So, thank you so much for being on the show again.
My pleasure, Hope. Thanks for having me.